lost art all over the world. People love their telephones, and I love mine too. And, we have too much of this all the time. And younger generations are not learning how to look at people in the eye when you talk to them. They're not learning how to pay attention because we don't touch people anymore. We don't touch people. We don't put our hands on them when we're talking to them. We don't have our grandbabies in our laps or younger kids standing next to us. I truly learned most of my storytelling at the foot of my grandmother, Mother Van. She was a fabulous storyteller. Every time she did something, she taught you something. And she would start it out in her lap with a pair of scissors pulling out her chin whiskers. And it was good practice because now I know how to pull mine out real good. But I sat in her lap. She told me all kinds of stories, and then I progressed. She taught me how to cook. She was my first cooking teacher. She put me up in a tall chair next to the counter and tied me in it with a kitchen towel so I wouldn't fall out, so she could move around the kitchen and I could be there and learn cooking from her example. I would sometimes try to reach over and taste it, and she said, don't do that yet. But she did teach me that the most important thing to know about cooking is you have to use all 5 of your senses. It's not just about tasting. You've got to look and see if it looks right. You've got to listen to it sometimes cooking to see if it's at the right stage or not. Is it boiling? Is it frying too fast? You've got to smell it. You can smell whether it's burning or not. You can smell whether it's good. You got to feel it sometimes. You feel in your mouth, and sometimes you have to feel it when you're putting your hands making dough or something like that. So it takes all 5 of your senses to cook good. If I'm a good cook, that's because that's the first thing that I learned. And I've been in kitchens all over the world, and every kitchen I've ever been in, I think they'd all agree with me. But I don't want to get off on too much Mother Van today because I am writing a book about Mother Van that I hope before I die might get published. And maybe we'll have to have a book signing here. But it's going to be called Iron Roof, which is Mother Van's nickname that I don't think she knew she had, but she might have, I don't know. But she was a fantastic woman ahead of her time. She had 5 or 6 businesses that were her businesses, not her husband's businesses. He ran the cotton gin, and his biggest claim to fame was he let her do whatever she wanted to do. And they were a fabulous partnership. He was proud of her. He loved her cooking, except for the time she accidentally put kerosene in the sweet potato pie instead of lemon. But that's the only time she ever made a mistake cooking, as he would have said. But I arrived in Murfreesboro in 1959. I was born exactly 1 month after my daddy Van, her husband, died. So when I came here, Mama and Daddy had decided they were going to start a nursery here. That was Mother Van's idea to kind of lure them to time. Her 2 sons, Earl and Dick Van, still lived here, but it wasn't her daughter. And she wanted somebody to stay in the house with her every night. As independent as she was, one thing she never could do was stay in a house after it got dark by herself. So the other grandchildren took turns until we moved here. And we moved here, and Mother Van always told me, Mama put me in her lap and said, here she is, Mama, she's yours, because I've got to help Glenn with the nursery. And Mother Van took that right to heart. I was hers. And everything I knew and learned came from her. So I'm not going to get off on her, But I do want to talk about storytelling and your family histories. I learned so much about my family history from her on both sides, the Vans and the Vincents. So get those things together and pass them on to the next generation. If you can't get their attention any other way, you can tell them certain things. They can Google it if they got to be on that phone. But I would suggest you get hold of them real good and you talk to them eye to eye and be touching them while you're talking to them. But library has always been very important to me. I came from a very reading family. At night, we had TV. It was black and white to begin with. And we always everybody had to be quiet at 6:25 because the weather came on. And Daddy depended on the weather. Mother Van depended on the weather for her flowers and had been in the habit when she raised chickens, she needed to know what the weather was. So there was complete silence in our living room at 6:25 so that Daddy could listen to Andy Roberts. That was his favorite. Now, Mother Van's favorite was Joe Folks. But they kind of compromised, and most of the time we listened to Andy Roberts. Y'all come on in. You're new folks, so I want y'all to especially hear about Murfreesboro. So we listened to the weather, and then, sometimes I'd get to see certain TV shows, but it was always ones that Mom and Daddy, Mother Van wanted to watch more than me. But before we turned on, most of the time in the evenings, Mama had her corner over here, and it had bookshelves all around it, and she had her books that she would be reading. Mother Van had her corner over here. She had all her books stacked up next to her. And Daddy had his little chair over here, and he had his things that he liked to read. So I grew up in a very reading family, and trips to the library were quite often. And when I was little, one of my main jobs, because Mother Van believed that grandchildren were cute and nice and all, but you should have a job. And so mine was to run errands all over town, because my legs were young, and so I could see good. Her sight was bad, but she would send me, and one of the things was to keep getting her books from the library. And she had to have the big print ones, but they always had a good selection of them. And then later on, Mama would get me to go for her books, because she would be busy working in the nursery. And one of the funny things was they had library cards in the back of the books. And you could look at the card and see who else had checked the book out. And Mama told me, she said, look in the book and see if your Aunt Ruby has checked the book out. She said, if she has, she's tried to erase her name. If she's tried to erase her name, that means it's sort of a kind of racy book. So make sure you check that one out. So I always did as I was told. My Aunt Ruby had been a missionary to Hungary and Africa. And whenever anybody said anything about Ruby Ubernoki, the next thing they said was, she was a missionary, So, she had to keep that facade, I guess. So if anything was in a book that was the least bit untoward, she would try to erase her name off that library card. But you could always usually tell the faint thing, and that's what Mama always looked for. So I always thought that was funny. Now, I was going to the library from the time I was 5 or 6 years old. This was not the first library that we had. The very first library that I remember was down Main Street, right next to the Murfreesboro Baptist Church. It was just a little white building, not a whole lot bigger than this room and maybe the next room was. And Miss Homa Gordon was the librarian. And she was the librarian most of all of my childhood and a little bit of my adult life. If any of y'all ever watched the Oscars back in the 60s, Miss Edith Head used to win a lot of Oscars for costumes. Now, Homer and Miss Edith were pretty much dead ringers for each other. Homer was slender. She kept her hair colored very dark henna red. She was kind of prissy. And she always wore Chanel suits. Almost every day she had on a different Chanel suit. And almost every day she wore red high heel shoes. And she clipped right along in those. Now, her hair was cut in a little page boy haircut, just like Edith had. And I said she looked kind of like Coco Chanel, too, because Coco had the hairdo like that, too. And she always had pretty thick pancake, light-colored makeup on. And she had the rouge, and she had the red lips. But, you know, I just thought she was fabulous because she was my introduction to library. And one day I did notice, you know, back then I was born into an older family. So we went to the funeral home to see the folks laid out in the casket a lot. And we went to see, I think it was my great-grandmother, because I was about 3 when she died. And I remember Daddy hoisting me up and telling me to lean over and kiss her on the cheek, which I was not real thrilled with that. And I think today that's one reason I don't really like to go to funerals. But I did notice that all of the people, especially the women that were fixed up in the caskets, their makeup kind of was the same as Miss Homer's. And so one day I just asked Mama, and I said, Mama, why do all the dead people's makeup look like Miss Homer? And she just very matter-of-factly said, well, she lives right next to the funeral home, and one of her side jobs is she goes over there and does the makeup on the corpses. And well, it makes perfect sense to me. You know, I always felt free to ask most any questions that I wanted to, which is another good thing. Whether they were considered appropriate or not, I always did it when I was just around Mama or Mother Van. But they freely told me things like that, and sometimes they would say, now you don't have to tell everybody that, but, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, and, you know, children are naturally curious, and I learned from them that you don't have to give them every detail, but when they ask a question, give enough of an answer that it will assuage their curiosity. Now, we used to tease my mama saying that she had more curiosity than anybody else in the world, because we lived right there, right here. We lived where the parking lot is. Our house was where the parking lot is now. So we were right there on Sycamore Street, which the bank was right across the street. The rescue squad and fire department were right across the street. So you could get on our front porch and you pretty much knew what was going on in the center of town. And Mama would sometimes, she would go out on the front porch a lot, and she liked to stand like this, and she would just look. And we called this the Gwendolyn stance. And I have a tendency to do it too. So she would look to see what was going on, and whenever there was a fire, they kept the key to the firehouse hanging on the outside of our front porch. So whenever we saw some man run up and grab a key, we knew before the alarm went off that it was going to be a fire. And so if Mama wasn't at the house, if she was in the nursery, we'd call down. I said, Mama, it's going to be a fire. Alarm's going off in a minute. And back then, everybody in town sometimes would follow the fire department to where they were going just to see where it was. And, you know, that was the internet of the day. So, And we would always say Mama had more curiosity than anybody. And she'd always say, well, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back. And we always took that. But she didn't explain until I was grown up what the satisfaction part was, which was really kind of sassy. I'm sure it came originally from Mother Van, because Mother Van was known as a very sassy woman. Since it's adults, curiosity killed the cat because he broke his neck trying to lick his coat. As Mother Van would say, his tail home. But satisfaction brought him back because before he died, he did get a glimpse of it. So he had his 9 lives, so he was brought back. But anyway, Miss Homer, I would go there when we were out from school in the summertime. I would go there, and sometimes I would stay till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she would not only tell you about books, but she would tell you stories too. And I'm going to tell you what. She was one good storyteller herself. Now, she could tell you some ghost stories, and then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the bright sunshine, in the summertime, I'd walk home, and I'd still be halfway scared. I'd be looking around. She was another fabulous storyteller. And back in the 90s, it was when the library had moved to the Roberts Bone House. There was this book that came out about Somerset House plantation down in Cresswell, North Carolina. It was about this woman who had been descended from the slaves there, and somehow or another she got together with a lot of her ancestors and family members, and they got together with the family members of the plantation owners. And they had a big reunion with the descendants of the slaves and the descendants of the plantation owners. Well, it was a big thing, and of course I was always very interested in history. So me and a friend of mine went down to see Somerset Place, and I came back and I reported to Miss Homer that I had been there, and she said, "Oh, I remember that place. It used to be a hunting lodge before they redid it up fancy. And we used to have the best parties down there." And she said, "Do you remember there's a fireplace in such and such room, and the corner of the mantelpiece is broken off?" And I said, "Well, yes, ma'am, I do remember that." She said, "Oh, we were at a big party, and somebody picked me up and set me on the corner of the fireplace, and the whole mantelpiece broke off." And I thought, well, that's a story I bet nobody else knows. Now, Miss Homer we figured out she'd been married about 3 times, but she was not your little prim, proper librarian with the bun and that never said boo. She had a personality. And I was thrilled because at that time I was known to go to a few parties too. So I thought, well, Miss Homer and I got more in common than I thought I did. So, after Miss Homer left, I think Beverly Warwick was the next librarian. She was the first librarian in this building, which this opened in what year? 90.
It was in the 90s.
Early 90s. And she was a fabulous librarian too. And we carry on that tradition with Miss Judy because she is a fabulous librarian too. We have great programs. We have a beautiful building. I've been on the library board at least 10 years, probably more like 15. And we do the best we can to bring what we can. I think the library is one of the shining stars in the crown of Murfreesboro. I truly believe that. But I remember one time not too long ago, we had the guy here from the Lost Colony thing, and he spoke, and one of the very first things he said was that the Albemarle region of northeastern North Carolina. I think John Lawson, one of the first explorers, had put this in his writings. It was a land known for its very outspoken and opinionated women. And I thought, hot dog, I knew I was where I belonged all the time. So if you're that kind of woman, you're in the right place. So, but I just wanted to emphasize so much how important the library has been to me, how it can be to everybody. The library is a sanctuary for many people still to this day. A lot of people who don't have a nice home to stay in, they'll come here during the day, and this is their sanctuary. They use the internet. They have access to books and, magazines. You can get movies here for very, very cheap and take them home. Not everybody has Netflix and all of these fancy TV stations. I myself don't. I'm not that big on television. I can sit there and think about stories and weave stories in my head, and that's the best TV station for me that there is. I don't see paying money for that, but that's just me. But I really want to emphasize how important libraries are. You said this is the first time you had been to our library, so you can change that today. Yeah. Now, some of y'all know a lot of Murfreesboro stories too. You've heard me tell a lot of stories. So if there's a particular one you would like for me to redo today, just let me know, and I'll be glad to try to accommodate you. So, now, Patty, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you got a couple of favorites. So, what's one of your favorites?
Little John.
Little John is going to be in my book. I'm writing a novel about Murfreesboro. It's not totally, parts of it are true, but I've had to change the names to protect the guilty. But I grew up, like I said, right here behind where the library is now. And I was sent up and down the street all the time to do errands. And nowadays, people wouldn't send a 4-year-old walking down the street to do anything. But back then, Mother Ann and Mama and Daddy knew everybody that ran every store on the street. And I've heard Mr. Carol Parker, who ran the grocery store that was right here, say, I knew I could see your little blonde head come by the window, and I'd watch till he got past me, and then the next storekeeper would watch. So, nothing ever happened to me then. I don't know if it would be that way today, but it was a different world back then. But I made friends with all of Murfreesboro's street people back then. And yes, we had street people back then too. And Little John was a tiny little black man who walked with, he even after he got put in the nursing home 3 miles outside of town, he would walk to town every day, and he'd bring his, like a limb to swat the flies with while he was walking. And he had worked for a lot of people, but he had worked for my grandfather at one point in time on the farm. And I was told that he was so small because his father had beat him terribly when he was a child. So he really didn't, he clung to my family because my father, my grandfather, and my grandmother and mama, they were all nice to him. And every time he'd see me, he'd say, there goes the baby girl. And he looked after me too. And a lot of times we had a horse stable where Alicia and Jay Rebel, their house is on where we had our last horse stable at. And sometimes I would go with Daddy in the evenings to feed the horses. And back then we fed our horses peanut hay. I'm told that you're not supposed to do that anymore. But back then we fed them what we could afford to get, and that's what most people fed their horses. So he would be in, a lot of times in summer evenings, he'd be already in the horse stable, and he'd be over there and at the peanut hay bales. And Daddy didn't mind. He slept there at night. And it didn't bother Daddy at all. He said it doesn't bother the horses. The horses like the company. He doesn't smoke, so we don't have to worry about him burning the barn down. And he might keep somebody away that would mess with the horses or burn the barn down. But he would call me over there. He said, "Come here, baby girl." And I'd come over there, and he would pick the peanuts out of the peanut hay and crack them. And he'd give me two, and he'd keep one. He'd crack some more, he'd give me two, he'd keep me one. I still don't like peanuts unless they are green right out of the ground and raw, just like that. So maybe I got more horse in me than I knew. But he was a good friend. And he unfortunately met his demise on the side of the road walking to Murfreesboro one day, and somebody hit him and knocked him over in the ditch, and I don't know if they ever did find out who the hit and run person was, but that was the end of Little John. But I had several other street folks that I love. Ernest is a main character in my book. I don't know if some of y'all latter people to town don't know Ernest, but Ernest was pretty androgynous looking fella. Some folks didn't know if he was a man or a woman. He wore a coat, and he was always carrying newspapers around. He'd stop at folks' houses that he knew would leave them their newspapers, and he would take the newspapers. And he lived out by Riverview School. And he also did yard work for some folks. And I always said, Ernest somehow or another cosmically knew whatever was going on there. If my mama knew or not a lot, Ernest probably knew more, because he was everywhere, and he observed everything when he was walking around home. And every now and then he'd wear a red toboggan, whether or not it was hot or cold, and I'd call up Mary Jo Ellis, I said, Ernest got the red hat on today. There's something big going on, probably. But he was a mess, and he would come to the Lee House, which is on High Street. I worked there, one of my 15 part-time jobs that I worked when I was going back to college. And Miss Jean Warren worked there most days, and I usually was the Wednesday night and the weekend person, and she'd say, now, Ernest probably don't come get his money because she paid him like 50 cents every week or something for taking the trash cans to the road and for picking up the extra newspapers, which he then took home with him, and he rolled them up and he burned them to put in his furnace to stay warm with. So one day, somebody knocked on the kitchen door, and I went, and it was Ernest, and he said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm working right now in place of Miss Jean. She has an office." "Well, where's my money?" And I said, "Here it is right here." And he said, "Are you going to be here all the time?" And I said, "Not all the time. I'll probably be here on Wednesdays and on weekends a lot." He said, "I'll make sure I come with Miss Jesus." I mean, he would keep you humble. That's one thing for sure. And so he and William Hall, who used to run the Napa store here, were big friends. And he'd go in the Napa store about every day. That was on his right, you know. And he and William would try to look out for him all the time. And you didn't look out after Ernest. Ernest looked out after you. But I got some good Ernest stories from William. One time, William felt really sorry for him. I think it was near Christmas, and he got all of these groceries and everything and took it out to Ernest's house and got Ernest to come out and he said, help me take the, and he looked at all of it and he said, this is store-bought food. I want restaurant food. So it kept you humble. He always told you what he thought. So William learned his lesson on that, and then William also bought him a window air conditioner one time because he didn't have any kind of air conditioning, and it was hot in a little house. He kept shut up real tight, and he was sort of a hoarder, but so William felt sorry for him. He bought him a little window air conditioner to put in his window, and he sent another fellow out there to hook it up. Well, Ernest would only let him as far as the door. He let him put it inside the door. He didn't let him hook it up or explain to him how it worked or anything. So, he came in the Napa store and William said, well, how do you like your air conditioning? He said, I don't know why it's supposed to be so good. I don't see that it's cooling nothing. And so William went out there that evening when he got off work, and the air conditioner was sitting in the middle of the living room floor. It was plugged in and it was on, but it was not sitting in the window, so it was just recirculating the hot air. So he said, well, how come you don't have it in the window? And he said, well, ain't nobody tell me nothing about putting it in the window. I thought it was just supposed to sit there. I use it for a coffee table. And he said, well, Ernest, if you put it in the window, it pulls in hot air and makes it cool air and blows it out. So that's why it works. I don't know if Ernest ever used it like it was supposed to be used. He probably kept it for a coffee table. But it tells us a big lesson about, we feel sorry for people and we want to do things for people, but we don't ask the people how they really feel about it. And that was a big lesson for me. So, would y'all like for me to do this again at another time? Judy said she would like for me to do it, and maybe we could get other folks to come, and we could have it at a different time. Is this a good time for y'all?
Yes.
Or maybe we can do some of them in the morning, and maybe we can do some at 2 in the afternoon, because some folks had said that was a better time for them. So, would y'all like to do this maybe every 3 months or something? And I could come up with more stories about Murfreesboro from different people, because I got a bunch of them.
Or every month.
Well, how about every other month? How about we compromise and do every other month? Well, I'll get with you and we'll put it on the schedule. This is February, so sometime in April that will be good. All right, so, well, nobody got much refreshments, so go get you some refreshments, mill around a little bit. I've enjoyed doing this very much, and I hope y'all have enjoyed listening to it. And like I said, we got a bunch more stories that we can come up with at another time.
Thank you, Booker.
Do you think you got us?
I think so. I think we had at least 2 or 3 people that were viewing during.
Oh, okay.
It'll be on Elizabeth S. Parker Memorial Library Facebook page.
I have to go in and get my library card.
Yes, you do.